Canada, eh? A big country with lots of oil, but not so much gold, which is why we're heading down south for today's episode. That's right, we're off to the wild frontiers of finance, the Alberta Stock Exchange. But wait, rewind a minute. First things first, what actually was the Alberta Stock Exchange? Think of it like the wild west of finance, a place where dreams were made and sometimes lost. Established in 1962, the Alberta Stock Exchange, or ASE, is a junior stock exchange based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Its purpose was to provide small companies, particularly in the resource sector, with a platform to raise capital. But it wasn't just any old stock exchange. It was a hotbed for mining exploration companies, especially those involved in searching for precious metals like gold. These companies, often referred to as junior mining stocks, could list their shares on the ASE, allowing them to tap into the enthusiasm and investment dollars of a growing number of individual investors across Canada and even further afield. By the 1990s, the ASE had become known as a launching pad for new ventures. Companies that started small could use the exchange to get their foot in the door, raise some cash, and then go on to bigger and better things. Many would go on to list their shares on the larger and more established Toronto Stock Exchange. So while the Alberta Stock Exchange itself might have been relatively unknown on the world stage, the companies that got their start there, well, they were the real stars of the show. One such company that rode the wave of the 1990s market frenzy was Bre X Minerals, a junior mining company that seemed destined for greatness. At least that's what everyone was saying from their offices in the heart of Calgary, Alberta. The headquarters of Bre X Minerals looked unassuming. Just another office building in a city full of them. But inside those four walls was brewing an excitement that would soon take over the world. Now let's zoom out a bit and bring in our man on the scene. Hi there, welcome to my channel. The Bre X. The story of Bre X began with a man named David Walsh. Not your typical mining engineer type. Walsh was a geologist who cut his teeth working for the Geological Survey of Canada. But unlike many of his peers, he didn't just want to study rocks, he wanted to find gold. After some time working in the Yukon, he set his sights on Southeast Asia, and in particular a place called Busong in Indonesia. With a name like Busong, you can probably see why this place was so appealing. Legend had it that the area was rich in gold, a treasure trove waiting to be uncovered. So David Walsh, armed with his rock hammer and an indomitable spirit, set out to prove the doubters wrong. Let me tell you, the doubters were many. Back in the 80s and early 90s, Indonesia wasn't exactly a mining hotspot, and the idea of striking gold there seemed far-fetched to say the least. But Walsh was undeterred. He assembled a team, acquired some land, and started digging. His hard work paid off in a big way when in 1993 discovered a gold deposit at Busong that was nothing short of spectacular. The sheer size of the find sent shockwaves through the industry. It was one of the largest undeveloped gold deposits ever found. Suddenly everyone was talking about Busong, and David Walsh became a minor celebrity in the world of mining. Back at Bre X's Calgary headquarters, the news from Busong was received with open arms. The company's future looked brighter than the gold they had just unearthed, and everyone was eager to get in on the action. The stage was set for Bre X to become a major player in the mining industry. The gold at Busong was not just a discovery, it was a game changer. It was against this backdrop of excitement that Bre X made a decision that would change everything. They decided to list their shares on the Alberta Stock Exchange. Now if you're thinking, wait a minute, isn't the Alberta Stock Exchange a Canadian stock exchange? Well, you'd be right. But by the 1990s, the ASE had become a magnet for international companies as well. Thanks to its reputation for fast-growing, dynamic resource companies, the ASE was no longer just a Canadian bourse. It had gone global. So when Bre X came along with their story of gold in Indonesia, the ASE was the perfect place for them to tell it. For Bre X, listing on the ASE opened the floodgates to a whole new world of opportunities. With a valuation that went from tens of millions to hundreds of millions in the span of months, the company was sitting on a gold mine, both literally and figuratively. This was during the dot-com boom, which saw many speculative investments do extremely well. Bre X was right in the middle of it. The listing sent ripples of excitement through the tight-knit community of mining investors. Word of mouth spread like wildfire, and soon everyone was buzzing about the latest stock to hit the big time. Bre X, people who had been following the Canadian market closely, started taking notice. This wasn't just another mining company. This was something special. The kind of investment that made people dream of quitting their day jobs and retiring to a life of luxury. And then came the tipping point when Bre X started appearing in the mainstream media. The Financial Post, the Wall Street Journal, even the New York Times ran stories about this up-and-coming mining company. For a small company like Bre X, this kind of exposure was invaluable. It turned every shareholder into a potential millionaire overnight. So what was the draw? Why were investors flocking to Bre X like bees to honey? Well, the answer is pretty simple, really. Greed. The greed of getting in on the ground floor of something big. The greed of turning a few $1,000s into a few million. There was a gold rush mentality going on here, and everyone wanted to be a part of it. But it wasn't just the greed. There was something else at play here, something that made people believe that Bre X was different. Something that made them think that this time it wouldn't end in tears. What they were seeing in the company's leadership and the way it was run, as well as its financials, was a level of competence that inspired confidence. It was the feeling that you've got a ticket on a winning horse, and you just needed to hang on tight. As the Bre X story started making headlines around the world, something incredible happened. People from all walks of life started buying the stock. Pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, private investors, they all piled in, each hoping to catch a piece of the golden dream. In fact, some of the biggest shareholders in Bre X were Canadian pension funds. How crazy is that? Pension funds investing in a penny stock. You don't see that every day. But the thing to remember here is that this wasn't your average penny stock. This was Bre X. Oh, and before we go any further, here's a quick message from today's sponsor. All right, back to the show. As the months rolled by, the frenzy around Bre X only grew stronger. The stock price kept climbing higher and higher, dragging the little company up with it. Bre X went from being a small mining company with a big dream to being a household name. Their journey to the top was meteoric, and it left everyone wondering how much higher can they go. So let's put some numbers on this, shall we? On January 1996, Bre X stock started trading at 17 cents per share. By April of the same year, that same share of stock was trading at $1.40. Talk about a bull run. To put that kind of growth into perspective, Apple's stock has never seen a daily increase that high, ever. Even in the wild days of the dot-com bubble. Apple's biggest single-day gain was only 24%, which is nothing compared to Bre X's 88% jump. What was driving this insane stock price? Is it the company's performance? Well, not really. Bre X wasn't making any money at this point. They were still exploring and developing their Busong site. No, the main driver here was hype, pure unadulterated hype. The media was having a field day. Every new filing from the company sent the stock price into a tizzy, and every press release was like a mini earthquake shaking up the financial world. It was a wild ride, and everyone was holding on for dear life. But then, something strange started happening. People started questioning the gold samples from Busong. Analysts started digging into the company's past, and whispers of doubt started spreading like wildfire. Could it be that the golden goose that laid the golden egg was actually a fraud? Well, as it turns out, that question was not just a whisper. It was a roar. The year is 1996, and rumors are beginning to spread about the Busong Gold Project in the Philippines. Now, people are starting to ask some questions. They wonder who's behind this company and why they haven't heard of it before. But more importantly, they want to know who owns the land at Busong, and why did they suddenly become so rich? Well, the answer to the first question is that no one knows. And the second is even more difficult to answer. In fact, it was an investigation into these very questions that would reveal the largest mining fraud in Canadian history. At the center of it all, we find the controversial geologist Michael de Guzman. He's the chief technical advisor for Bre X, and he claims to have discovered a gold deposit larger than any in the world. But when news breaks of his sudden death while visiting the Busong site, red flags start flying. His body was discovered on January 17, 1997, just 2 days after he arrived. Reportedly, he suffered from a heart attack, but there's something strange about the story. You see, Michael had recently undergone tests and was told that he was in perfect health. Also, no one witnessed the event. According to the local police, they were called to the scene, and upon arrival, they found the body lying face down in a drainage ditch. His camera and briefcase were missing. His clothes were neatly folded beside him, and there were no signs of a struggle. The only thing out of place was a small amount of blood coming from his left nostril. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but nobody could explain why he was in such a remote location, alone, in the middle of the night. Did he have enemies in the Philippines? And was this a case of foul play? Or was this the result of something more sinister? Unfortunately, we may never know. However, as the story of Michael de Guzman began to unravel, the true extent of the Bre X scandal started to emerge. See, before Bre X became famous for their Busang gold discovery, they were nothing more than a small exploration company, and in 1993, they purchased a small Philippine company named Skyline Mines, which gave them rights to explore a large tract of land near the town of Mankayan. There, hidden among the mountains and thick jungle, lay an ancient gold mine that had been worked by the natives for hundreds of years. The company started doing some preliminary drilling and made a few interesting discoveries, including a large area known as the B Zone, which was rich in gold. But this wasn't enough to turn a profit. They needed a lot more data. That's when Michael de Guzman came along, a graduate of the prestigious Royal School of Mines in England. Michael was one of the most respected geologists in the world. He was recruited to lead the Bre X team in their exploration of the Busang site. In June of 1994, he released his first report, and it contained some extraordinary findings. Michael estimated that the B Zone contained somewhere between 20 and 30 million ounces of gold, which made it one of the largest deposits ever discovered. This caused the company's valuation to skyrocket, and shares began trading at 20 cents each. But as the year drew on, investors started to get nervous. Where were the profits? By the end of 1994, Bre X had spent over $20 million in exploration costs, and they still hadn't made a single dollar. In response to growing investor concerns, Bre X decided to do another round of drilling at Busang. It would be the largest and most ambitious project in the company's history. Under Michael's direction, they drilled 10,000 meters into the earth. But when the results came back, it was clear that something was wrong. The numbers didn't add up. The ratio of gold to waste rock was far lower than expected. So Michael was brought in to explain the discrepancy. But his explanation was rather unusual. According to Michael, the gold had somehow migrated since his last report, causing the entire ore body to shift. Investors were unconvinced, and sales of Bre X stock began to dwindle. In order to regain their favor, the company announced plans for a new drilling program. However, this program was never finished. On December 12, 1996, Bre X released a statement to the market announcing that Michael de Guzman had passed away suddenly in the Philippines. While many were shocked by the news of his untimely death, others saw it as a clever move to cover up their misleading reports. Within weeks, they released their final report, and it was another blockbuster. Not only did Michael claim to have discovered the largest gold deposit in the world, but it was also the largest silver deposit and the third largest copper deposit. The share price exploded to $8 per share, giving the company a market cap of $4 billion. But the skeptics were getting wise to the company's tactics, and soon they would expose the truth. The story of Michael de Guzman was the talk of the town, and rumors were spreading like wildfire. People started questioning everything, and this led to a wave of sell orders. In response, Bre X announced a trading halt, and they promised to release the results of an independent audit within a few weeks. When the audit report finally came out, it was shocking. The independent firm, Bre concluded that the amount of gold at Busang was not economically recoverable. In other words, they couldn't make enough money to justify reopening the mine. But there was more. A closer examination of the core samples revealed something disturbing. Some of the gold was actually fake. Some of the samples were actually pure copper, and others contained pyrite, also known as fool's gold. Even worse, their lab results showed that the grade of gold was much lower than what they reported. Basically, Bre X was selling fake rocks to investors. As the gravity of the situation sank in, more and more holes were found in their story. For example, their claim about the size of the ore body didn't add up. All of the drilling results pointed to a much smaller deposit. And then there was the issue of Michael's death. The official report said that he died of a heart attack, but others believed that he was murdered. So much for being in perfect health. After the scandal broke, his widow demanded another investigation, and the results were conclusive. According to the autopsy report, Michael was poisoned with cyanide. To make matters worse, the original documents related to the discovery of Busang were destroyed in a suspicious fire. With all the evidence gone, it was impossible to say whether or not Brex had committed fraud. But by this point, everyone already knew the answer. The whole thing was one giant scam. By February 1997, Brex stock had lost 90% of its value, and thousands of investors were out of luck. The company faced several lawsuits, but they were never able to pay out the investors. Even worse, the head of the Philippine Stock Exchange resigned amid allegations of negligence. The country's regulators had failed to protect the public, and now they were under scrutiny. An inquiry was launched to determine how Brex was able to pull off the largest mining fraud in Canadian history. But even that led to dead ends. The politicians involved were never charged, and the company was allowed to continue operating as if nothing happened. But you know what did happen? The Alberta Stock Exchange collapsed. Here's why. See, when Bre X Minerals started trading on the Alberta Stock Exchange, it seemed like a good move. The stock market was booming, and they could use the money to further explore the Busong site. But the AEX wasn't a reputable exchange. It was considered a junior market, and that meant that there were virtually no regulations. Anyone could list their stock, and there were no requirements for reporting or disclosure. This gave scammers the perfect opportunity to fool unsuspecting investors. And when Brex was exposed, the damage was done. The AEX was seen as a failure, and eventually it closed down. In the wake of the scandal, new laws were put in place to protect investors and prevent another Brex situation. The companies were required to adhere to strict reporting standards, and the new laws also applied to mining companies. This resulted in fewer mining stocks being traded on the market, especially on the junior exchanges. In fact, the number fell by 80%. Those that remained had to comply with higher reporting standards. The entire mining industry was forced to clean up their act. Today, the memory of Brex lives on through the stories of those affected by their actions. Thousands of investors lost their life savings, and many of them were elderly individuals who had worked hard their whole lives only to have it all wiped away in a flash. It was a devastating blow. To make matters worse, the people responsible for the scam got away with most of the money. Company's founders were charged with fraud, but they weren't punished as severely as many expected. Ultimately, the CEO served only 18 months in prison, while the CFO was given a suspended sentence. Meanwhile, the lawyers and accountants involved walked away with hefty fines and a slap on the wrist. Despite all the damage they caused, the truth is that Brex was just the tip of the iceberg. Since then, there have been countless other scandals involving mining companies. In fact, just a few months ago, another Canadian mining company called Sandstorm Metals was accused of fraud after they claimed to have discovered a massive gold deposit in Arizona. The company was investigated, and their shares were halted from trading. But according to the founder, everything they said was true. The problem was that they were unable to prove it. In the end, the company was delisted, and their future remains uncertain. So what can we learn from all of this? Always do your research before investing in any company, especially in the mining sector. If it seems too good to be true, then it probably is. Also, be wary of companies that make bold claims without providing any evidence. And don't trust everything you see on the internet. Lastly, diversify your portfolio and invest in a variety of different assets. That way, if one investment goes bad, it won't ruin your entire portfolio. Brex may be gone, but their story serves as an important reminder for investors today. So remember the tale of Bre X Minerals the next time you hear about a company that's making big promises. And until next time, happy investing.